Qiansen is a Chinese national who's joined us for the last several years, and who has done, I've had the pleasure of really having Qiansen as a student in the past, and who's actually assisted us in the office. He's got really a brilliant hand and mind, and he, however, chose a thesis subject, which surprised me at first. You actually started in China.
Yes.
And we're going to do work on second-tier cities, as I recall, to try to look at giving them more attention, more prominence, more appeal, etc. And instead shifted to an American context, especially suburban context, making a case to me, which was pretty fascinating, that China's rapid growth and transformation was probably going to be facing the same fate that American suburbs faced, which is somehow that rapid growth, perhaps not the deepest thought, maybe more impulse and space expansive development. And so he wanted to, and since American urbanism was looking at the suburban settings and thinking about them ahead of some of their Chinese brethren, that he wanted to take and look at that and look at the transformation possible here in America as a way to set the stage for his thesis. So with that, Qiansen.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Qiansen Yang, and welcome you all to come to my thesis. And before I start, I just want to thank all the committees and all the classmates inside my studio to support me going through all this process. Thank you very much. And my thesis title is Suburban Infill and Regeneration, High Density and Mixed-Use Development in Prince George's Metro Station area. So why am I doing this thesis? As Gus mentioned, the Chinese city is in rapid growth and expansion. So I think it's very important. It's very important for me to work in the spectrum at the scales of the urban design scale to the architecture scale. And I plan myself the career to study as an architect in the United States. So I'm thinking that choose a site locally might be benefit for myself. And I'm very interested in the mixed-use development and how to use the creative thinking to address the urban infrastructure problems and opportunities. So what are the problems inside my site? So this is an aerial perspective in my site. It holds many suburban characters. You can see that there's a lot of problems inside my site. The autocentric, low density, and isolation and dislocation, and ad hoc conditions, and too many single-use buildings here. And it creates an unsafe pedestrian environment. And because of the unpleasant environment, so it hardly can attract more developers to come here, and it has very poor economic performance. So from this diagram, you can see that the disorganized context. The mall holds down suburban characters with a large surface of parking, and the government is trying to do something with higher density and mixed use inside the university town center, and the east-west highway working as a barrier for the pedestrian to cross from the mall to the metro station. And so this diagram shows that the impression of the tension between the suburban, the large surface of underutilized parking space and the high density and mixed-use development inside my area, which result in the higher vacancy inside of the retails here. So my site context. So my site locates 3 miles away from the University of Maryland. It has shuttles connect directly from the site to the campus, and it has a lot of bus route going on inside my site. So it has the potential for the further development. And inside my site, it has a lot of educational institution buildings. So it has a high school, it has a community college, it has the elementary school here. So it's very important to consider about the safe environment for the pedestrian. Talking about the pedestrian experience, so the primary connection is for the pedestrian from the mall to the metro station is a pedestrian bridge. This is a configuration diagram shows that the suburban and urban configuration inside my site. So potential for the new development. So the black boundaries shows the transit-oriented development approved by the government, and which is not an integrated urban plan design. You can see the red zone implies the suburban crackers, and the green zone implies the more urban crackers with some process. And this is a scope for my intervention. And the reason for that is that I think it's appropriate to connect the existing mixed-use development of the University Town Center back to the metro station, and also connect the successful mall to the metro station. And the unique opportunities inside my site. And the first one is the potential for designing intersection, because the east-west highway working as a barrier, and the pedestrians use the bridge for the overpass. So there is a lot more opportunities for further develop strategies in the section. And the suburban and the urban tension I mentioned before can be overcome without extensive demolish. You can see for my scope of the intervention, I only need to take 7 single-use buildings away for the new development. Before I further share my design, I want to explain what happens here. So the first thing is that the figure field diagram shows that 1940s, 1980s, and now. And the mall was there since 1959, and it used to be an open-air mall. And since the additional retails coming in, and the mall becomes enclosed. And Edward Stone proposed the vision for the new urbanism using this office building and high-rise towers here, but only this building A and building B, known as the Metro 1 and Metro 2, is being built. And they use the rest of space for the parking space. So when you look at this history context, you can see this place is struggling with the suburban and urban environment all the time. So I will address 3 key issues in my site. The first one is connection failure, so the pedestrian overpass. And so some people even climb over the fence to cross the east-west highway, and the government is trying to increase the height of the fence. It's very dangerous. And the pedestrian bridge is underutilized, uninviting, and is in disrepair. And a lot of people, I can smell somebody peeing inside that bridge. So it's very unpleasant. And also impacts my site significantly. So you can see the formless intersection, and it's very dangerous for people to cross. And underutilized parking space, and working as a barrier for the communities to the mall. And the big destination is too much inward focused. You can see that the mall is only serve inward, and the metro station hiding behind the parking garage here. And this is the entrance for the metro station. So I'm searching for some mixed use and high density development to help me to repair this fragmented context. So start with how I can do some intervention with the mall, how I can do some intervention with the metro station, and with the frontage of the east-west highway with the higher density, and something with the intersection and nodes strategies. So I did some precedent study to give me some more insight from my thesis. So in Florence, in Italy, the Ponte Vecchio use bridge architecture to help them make better connection to across the river. And the Illinois Oasis, they use the cafe, the architecture, bridge architecture to help make better connections. And in Texas, they use the pedestrian plaza, Sunken Plaza, to separate the pedestrian and the traffic flows. And this time in Ahel, they use this. This time the pedestrian goes above the highway. So inside my site, the metro to mall path is most tortuous. So looking at the topo diagrams, you can see that the pedestrian bridge is at the peak point of this area. So the experience of the pedestrian will be that you're going up along with a slope, and then you go upstairs, and then you're going down. So it's very unpleasant. And so there's as I mentioned before, there's possibilities and opportunities to help redesign the strategies inside the section. So the section intervention, I propose 4 different kind of section intervention. The first one is that to change one segment of the east-west highway to the boulevard and compress the traffic and make the cars and pedestrians to share this road. And the second strategy is using the Sunken Plaza to make the people going underneath the highway, which is proved to be ineffective because it's dark and people prefer the grade level. And the third one is that to execute bridge architecture to help make better connection with the incorporation of the existing infrastructure. And the last one is that to depressing the highway and make the cars going underneath this pedestrian grade level. And another reason why I'm choosing the last one, and the reasons is that why I'm choosing the last one is that it gives much more freedom for the pedestrians, and it will add values to the new property, to the properties of the site. And another reason for why I'm choosing the last one is that based on the special topo conditions. Well, this is a section shows the east-west highway, and you can see that the pedestrian bridge is much higher than the rest points of the road. It's about 40 feet higher than the Adelphi road. And by making this, depressing the highway, making the highway going underneath the pedestrian connections, you can make this road much more flat and give a better experience for the drivers. And how I can make this happen? I have 4 steps. The first one will be shape the top of the hills by depressing the highway, and then I will drop the bridge down to the ground and eliminate the 3 intersections and make new connections. And since I dropped the highway 18 feet down to the ground, lower than the lower, and I can have at least the opportunity to construct at least 2 levels of the parking ramp underneath it. So this is the existing condition. You can see the east-west highway, the pedestrian bridge, the metro station, the mall. And this is what my proposal looks like. So you can see by depressing the highway, remakes the new connection, gives the opportunities for much more freedom of the pedestrian. And by using these courtyard types of plots, creating some more private space. And you can see these the new connections. The middle one will be much more friendly, but also can be shared with some bus and bike lanes. And these 2 new connection could be a little bit a car and pedestrian sharing. And this new development also opens up can give opportunities for further development of this mall here. So this is 4 big principles in my urban design. The first one is the transformation of the infrastructure, the circulation diagram. The second one is a courtyards, courtyards with green vegetation and playground. And the third one is a street connected architecture. So it means that wherever you construct your buildings here, you can have multiple exits for different transit mode. And natural ventilated landscape parking. So I'm going to go detail to tell how this is going to happen. So since the highway is depressed and is connected directly back to the minus 2 levels of parking ramps, and with the bus stops and the circulation costs to bring people going upstairs, and with the green perforations come here. And the minus 1 level. And at the grid level, you can see that the new connections with mixed use, with office buildings facing the noisy highway, with the pubs, with the restaurant, with the cafes, with cafe wrapping the new bridge to prevent the pedestrian exposed to the highway. And this is a mapping diagram to show that. Okay.
Sorry, just, are these new buildings or?
Yes, these are new buildings.
So they are,
yeah.
they're inserted within the mall?
Yes, they are upstairs, yeah.
They're on the edge of the wall.
Hands on.
But you're changing the mall or tearing it down and adding them, or is the mall stops?
A little bit of both.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So I did some calculation to prove that my parking ramp is effective. So by doing this green perforation, it gives me about at least 6% of the natural ventilation, and plus this side of the parking ramp open totally up to the east-west highway. So it gives me at least 25% of the natural ventilation. So in total, I can get at least 30% of the natural ventilation, which proves which will make this parking ramp very inexpensive and effective. So this is the existing condition of the east-west highway and the fence, the overpass, and you can see the gas station placed here, and a lot of cars and pedestrians going here. This diagram is my proposal. Is that so you can tell from this image that the depressing highway is not offensive like something like a tunnel, but it has plenty of the vegetation and daylight and all the natural ventilation and multiple transit modes going on here with bus stops, with a new bridge working as a shelter for the people waiting for their bus. So urban design idea need to be developed incrementally with flexible alternatives. So I'm thinking my development as phases. So the first one and two phase will be the infrastructure transformation, and the third one I'm starting to programming my architecture, the courtyards, with at least 500 parking space serving the upstairs programs inside 120,000 square foot development. And this is a diagram to show that the mixed use inside my area. So you can see this is before. By making this new development, create some kind of residential communities and the office building facing the highway, and the residential building holding back because it's more private, and some retails and pubs and daycares, the mixed use programs working as connection programs going from the metro station to the mall. So I'm going to bring you guys through my board. So this big section shows that the primary pedestrian activities happens at the grid level. You can see from the metro station and the courtyard and some cafe and office building and the daycare center, and it supports it gives opportunities for bike lanes and cars, and also give opportunities for the new retails for the mall. And we're stepping outside the metro station. What you face is instead of the dark tunnel, you face a pedestrian plaza with all the retails, with a gym, with a cafe, and you can pick your cars going underground and pick your cars. And when you're going a little bit forward, you can see this depressing highway and the bus stop and the restaurant and the Target in front, and also the green roof. And then we go to the courtyard experience. experience a private environment with a daycare center where their parents can drop their kids there, and they can go shopping either this way and go to work either this way, and with a playground with a green preparation here. So this is the architecture scale of my thesis. So the big idea of it is that my architecture both serves people inward and outward. So with the programs of the back shop and retail serving outward, and some gym and cafe serving inward, and with the back storage and backlands with children playground and green preparation. So this is an experience that you can inside my courtyard. So you can see that one of the unusual idea of my urban design is that preparing the below grade parking ramps by using a series of the landscape of the children recreation activities, and you can see my ground is 2 levels above the highway, and unlike other city parking ramps, so my ramps gives people better nature ventilation and air condition and sunlight, and a lot more activities inside my site. And so usually the parking ramp is a worst experience inside of one project, but in my project it could be the most pleasant experience inside all my site. So that's all about my thesis.
Question. You haven't changed, I don't really need this, Garth, but you haven't changed the level of Bellcrest Road, right? Bellcrest Road
No.
stays where it is.
Yes.
Right? And then the reason why you only have 2 bridges, just point to Bellcrest Road so everybody knows what I'm talking about here. Yeah, it's that road, which is the main spines through there. And then the reason you have 2 bridges is because on the left side of the plan, you didn't bridge that because you have to bring the highway back up to grade there?
No, that's not the reason. The reason is that I'm giving the options that you can wrap it, you can leave it open. So this perspective view is only one option, that if you find this successful, you can wrap it here. So this is
the ramping starts east of Bellcrest Road, right?
Yeah.
And then goes under Bellcrest.
Stays down.
And then
stays down.
stays down
Yeah.
all the way to, okay.
Yeah,
But it
stays
does-
down and
And
goes
stays
down
down,
here.
it meets grade there,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I want to make.
So I'll start with just a response. It's an incredibly ambitious project that tries to solve many problems, right? You have traffic problems, you have environmental problems, you have economic problems, you have quality of space, quality of life problems, that you're trying to address all of them in a place that's been rather poorly loved for the last 50 years, as the result of not very thoughtful investments, right?
Yes.
What is the most important thing to you? What would be the criteria for success for this project? What are you trying to do in doing this intervention, at first and foremost?
I think depressing the highway and make better connections is foremost, is a higher priority of my thesis, because I think the freedom that this development is only for me, but the people can have a single development of their own. So I'm only setting up the stage for this to happen. So I'm thinking of that the transformation of the highway is the key for my thesis.
And it's also the connection to the metro, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this metro is this underutilized asset in the community, and by creating all this development on this side of the highway, well, not quite exponentially, but you're dramatically increasing the opportunity for people to live here. You're dramatically increasing the opportunity for people to live here, to work here, and then connect to all the other places that they can connect to by metro. You're creating a sense of place here. There is no there right now. Right? Well, there's a start. University Town Center is a really good start, but you're trying to increase that dramatically. I think it is a heck of a a problem to take on in terms of scale, and I want to tag on and commend you for that. I have a couple of questions. How many residential units are you adding in this? You know, how many apartments or condos, or, you know, how many people could live here in addition to work here and shop here? Hundreds, or did you quantify it?
I'm sorry, I didn't quantify that.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Because I think that's key to bringing this to life, obviously, and I was just looking at how you distributed your residential components. I think you've done a good job of kind of balancing the residential alongside, you know, the office and the retail. What were your thoughts about, is this happening all at one time? Is this happening in phases?
It's happening in phases, as I mentioned before. So I'm thinking about, so this is a sequence of my phases. The first phase will be the corner, because I think corner is usually have the highest value. And then the second phase will be happening in front of the mall. So after these two happens, I'm thinking about you can either demolish this phase, demolish this the stuff in front of the metro station, or either goes that way to redevelop that single-use development building. And so each phase the program have 120,000 square feet, and which have 500 parking space to serve it. Yeah.
I want to just echo what has been said, that this is a very ambitious undertaking. It's a couple of observations about what's going on right now. There are a number of places throughout the United States, and certainly several in Washington, where the communities are doing makeovers of existing locations of infrastructure. This makes me think about what's happening in Tyson's in Virginia. I don't know if you know about that. A place that was designed, or was conceived in the 1960s that's totally automobile dependent, and they're talking about a retrofit that will take 20 or 30 years and require essentially creating a whole new pattern of streets and blocks. Capitol Crossing over the 395 depressed segment of highway in Washington. I don't know if you know about that. They're going to deck it over and build new things. I think what you've done is an exploration that speaks to a lot of what's happening in reality, not just in here and perhaps eventually in China.
Yeah.
Although I was just recently in China, and they're operating at a different scale. I was in Shanghai. They're building 7 subway lines all at once in Shanghai. The question I would ask about this, and it has come up with these other developments with which I'm familiar, is the relationship between the deployment of density and uses, the cost of the makeover, the infrastructure work. I mean, there's a tremendous investment required to sink that highway, and the creation of a community that is walkable, and where the people might own only one car or no car instead of 2 cars, because one of the things that would govern a lot of how feasible this is the relationship between density, cost of redevelopment, particularly the infrastructure, and the automobile, the parking demand. And as you may know, for example, in Washington, D.C., in transit, a number of the transit-oriented development neighborhoods, they are lowering the parking requirements, because on the assumption that a lot of the tenants, a lot of the residents, particularly the younger, will opt not to have 2 cars or even 1 car. So I'm just curious if you get in your thesis research, and the research here is your analysis is fabulous, by the way. In all of that analysis and research, did it lead you to, for example, come up with a design which right now looks like the density is pretty well constant over the whole site? One wonders if you explore, this is now a rhetorical question, why the density might not be higher toward the eastern half, not only because of what's already there, but because of the accessibility for pedestrians to the metro center. So it might be interesting, if you were to spend another semester on this, to start exploring how the gradation of density and the uses might actually change. Right now it's fairly homogeneous, right? Yeah. It's pretty much uniform, and that may that may have
And there are
been...
big buildings out there, I mean, there's...
Oh, yeah, no, I know. I'm just curious. It's really not a criticism, it's just a I think it's a question that this poses, which is, should the density at the east end and the west end be, as you show, the same? Should it be higher at one end than the other? What should the components...
Should the building blocks be similar thicknesses also? Different, your building blocks are almost...
60 feet.
Yeah, but they're similar thicknesses.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that's for perhaps daylighting and solar strategies and things like that. But some of those thicknesses might actually vary depending on the, the use inside of it. Residential might be different than office, and it might be different again than a retail component. In your new construction, can an anchor store come in? I know there's anchor stores already at the mall, but if a new retail establishment wanted to come in and be in the newer part of the development, I'm not seeing a place for that really to be absorbed. But I think these are good problems to have. It's an exciting, and the blocks are similar in scale. I mean, I'm surprised to see there's not a little variety.
It's a bit of an updating of, at one level, it's a bit of an updating of a similar strategy for Grand Central, which is you put the transit at a lower level and you build a deck over top of it, right? And that's what they did at Grand Central to make all the real estate value at Park Avenue, all those areas north of Grand Central. I guess a couple of questions come to my mind about that in terms of your strategy, which is, I guess what I was asking before is maybe there could even, if you have to accept the premise that East-West Highway in this location is never going to be a pedestrian street. And the current master plan for that area calls for trying to transform it into a pedestrian street. And you've taken the opposite point of view, which is to deck over and to say it's going to be a kind of throughway through there and not a surface street that really could be inhabited. And it's okay. I think that's an okay proposition to take. I think the thing I would be looking for more in the research is, were you to try to make it a pedestrian street, did you look at what you would have to do to it? I mean, for example, is there 40,000 cars a day or 50 or 60? And at what point does that become untenable? Because traffic engineers will tell you above 40, it's really hard to have a pedestrian environment, even though there are boulevards in Paris and Connecticut Avenue in DC that carries that much traffic in some respects. So would you have to widen it to be able to achieve that and have a kind of frontage road or something, So that would be, one other point I want to make is that I think the strategy seems fine. I think what I'd be looking for is more of a deck, and also, two things. I would be looking as well for places where other amenities might occur, like schools and things, so you could have a complete community, more of a connection to the retail center that's there that doesn't really work right now, which is the one that they built recently up where the supermarket is and things. And then probably even looking at building over the metro itself. So that you could get more density, get more places, because there's no real reason why you couldn't build over that as well.
Yes, exactly.
So Matt brought up Connecticut Avenue, and looking at the image down here, the perspective, I've been thinking about DuPont Circle since then, since you started, where Connecticut dives under, DuPont Circle for several blocks, and makes that stretch of Connecticut very walkable, where it seems like what you've done is you've gone through some effort to resculpt the section, but not looked at actually getting most of that traffic, if it is in those numbers that Matt cites, underneath, and creating a very pedestrian-friendly front to the heart of your project.
Yeah, you can have more of a green plaza over the car area.
But I don't think that's what he's, I think I think that's the dilemma of this thesis, which is by making this grid network a couple levels above East-West Highway, you're basically turning East-West Highway into kind of a through thing. It's really, I think it's very difficult for it to have a successful pedestrian environment. And I would almost think you'd go in the opposite direction, which would be to say, hey, screw it, we're going to put this deck over the top of this. It's going to be very different with very high density.
Outside of Stockholm.
Yeah, it's a tunnel
It has a much
almost,
larger
and you put 10,
deck.
20-story buildings on top of it.
Or park space.
It's
Or even park space at the level he's putting it, rather than,
I think we're both arguing for the same thing, more deck and less just little bridges going across.
Is there a response to some of these points?
No, I'm just learning, listening.
I just want to be sure. It's been a while since we heard from you.
I just like area.
I just wanted to add one other item to the discussion. I think that you have worked very hard to create a very strongly connected environment between the metro and the mall. And we've heard a lot of controversy about whether this street itself should become the level for connection. But I'm looking to the north now, where there's quite a bit of housing, and there's Northwestern High School, and there's some community buildings like the library and community center and a bunch of churches. So there's a fairly significant flow of people coming from the north who would like to get to the mall. And I'm just thinking that there might be some low-hanging fruit here, because the street that's going through, I think it's Toledo, is not all that highly trafficked, and then there's the loop that's going around the parking lot of the mall. And since you did such, I think, a very good job of adding some architecture to the front of the mall to rationalize that and make it more pedestrian friendly, I'm just wondering if you didn't think a little bit about how you might do something similar to the north and to the west of the mall to depress that parking and to increase pedestrian connectivity to the housing developments to the north and the west and all of these other community buildings. So I'm wondering, did you at some point in your thinking consider the mall as a kind of 360-degree experience? I know that's asking a lot. It might be asking for another semester.
Yeah, that's the future phase, I think. Yeah.
Can I just talk a little bit about
Of course. Yeah.
the overall strategy, and what I appreciate is your seriousness with which you engage the problem to really try to solve the problem. But I would wonder just that maybe I would ask you to consider, especially given where you're going in your career, to maybe step back a little bit and think sort of bigger, think more visionary, think more, maybe perhaps more conceptually in terms of what is the bigger problem here, or what is the bigger agenda that you might bring as a designer to this incredibly complex context. And I guess what I want to say, on one hand, I think you've done an excellent job. You've taken care of the road, you've taken care of the parking, you've made a series of beautiful gardens, you've created block typologies which can then be rented out and populated with all these black figures, on every floor. I'm not sure, And so I think you've urbanized actually this area completely. You've created a density there that is an expansion of an urban context. I'm a little bit confused as to where the block typology originates, why it's appropriate in this context. I didn't hear you discuss perhaps the surrounding context or other forms of urbanization that might have informed this. Savannah, Georgia is one that comes to mind immediately, a kind of piece of a kind of block infrastructure. But I guess I would like to zoom out a little bit to that very first historic development plan that you have, where clearly the site was a kind of farmland, it looked like to me, on the edge of a small town. Am I right in saying that? You did the very first plan? Very first.
Here?
Yeah, on the left, the historic
here,
area,
the farmland, you mean here, okay.
And which clearly gave the area its real estate value to be able to make a building that was completely at a different scale than anything else around it, right?
Yes.
And so I think it's and then I look at those maps, which are really incredibly interesting, and how it became more and more, not densified, but larger scale buildings kept aggregating around the spine of the road. And I think there's something very unique about this site in the sense that it is at the edge, again, not knowing the area at all, but that must be a larger, that's the biggest plan I have, is at the edge of a much larger watershed, right? So I guess my question, and I look at the site and I wonder, rather than going in with a kind of major developer mentality where let me design everything, let me create turn this into a kind of urban, a fragment of a city or some kind of urban condition, why not go through and look at the context of that site and its history, that it's somewhere in between. It's not, it's suburban, urban, rural. It has a sort of, I mean, once you sink the road, you might as well cover it all over. I mean, I guess that's my initial reaction is, okay, you put all this money into sinking the road, why are we still seeing the cars? Right? I mean, so once you do that, you kind of can say, well, okay, I've spent all this money, now I have this incredible empty site with a series of really strange buildings all over the place, in kind of ragged edges, internally, related, completely have no exteriority. So what is that context? So maybe the strategy might, an alternative strategy might be to go in more like a surgeon and begin to locate certain kind of, primary infrastructures, absolutely, but perhaps not with such a kind of totalitarian segregation of program, because the one iconic image or example that I think every student knows inside out at this point, which really doesn't work, but it sort of set an interesting precedent, is the parking garage of Herzog de Meuron in Miami, right, where suddenly programs aren't, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, but actually are much more sort of blurred and not integrated, but I think in the end, if you're looking, I think your agenda is to create a life here, right?
Yes.
You're trying to create a cultural environment. And I'm not convinced that the kind of corporate nature of the personification of the architecture is going to create that environment that you're looking for, with a kind of predetermined kind of planning of these sort of squares and blocks and office types and dimensions of buildings. It's already been talked about, right? So I guess that the question, and when you said the most important thing was to sink the highway, which I think is a really good question, I think that your most important sensibility was to create a series of parks. And if that became the driving force, like what is the infrastructure that you have to bring? Maybe the parks aren't only at one level. Maybe they go all the way up inside the buildings. Maybe it's a series of towers. I just sort of, I appreciate the development of the section. I think that's your strongest initiative. But if you look at Hugh Ferris's drawings of New York City, clearly the section calls into question, where is ground? We no longer know where ground is. So, again, I want to compliment you on the thoroughness and the professionalism with which you embarked and completed the project. I would just say, if you're going back to China and you're going to change the world, maybe think about some of the bigger agendas that you might bring to that condition.
Yeah, yes.
Let me just mention one other project you might want to take a look at. There's a plan that's been approved by Howard County for the makeover of downtown, in quotes, Columbia, Maryland, where there's a shopping mall. And this is really picking up on your point about the mall in the area to the north. If you look at the plan, they've essentially taken a site which is mainly a giant parking lot with a very large regional shopping mall, and that was built by Rouse back in the 60s. And this plan actually calls for eventually chopping up the mall and eliminating a lot of it. And I think this is in a way extending your idea, and what I think you've heard from our colleagues, which is that in a way, this looks like it might really be just phase 1 of a 3 or 4 phase exploration, because I completely agree. I think the mall itself, I've been there, I can't stand the place. I just can't wait to get out and go there. I think you should have performed surgery on that. Take a look. Yeah, exactly. What they did in Columbia is as in Tyson's, they have overlaid a new framework plan, which is mainly about circulation, about blocks and roads and open space, and then they went from there.
Over here.
Yeah.
The one thing that I wanted to add, from sort of a practical, both from a practical and an ecological point of view. On the one hand, we look at the mall, and what I appreciate, I think you set yourself too many boundaries in your exploration.
Okay.
In that the cost of burying the highway is much greater in both in financial terms and in terms of environmental terms than the retained value of the shopping mall that you've chosen to preserve, which is sort of what forced you to keep the road where it is and build it downstairs. And I think that given the ambition of the overall plan, you'd been much better off to sort of wipe the slate and start over. And the one thing that you might have tried to do as an alternative, because I agree that the East-West Highway is really a highway and there's too many cars to deal with it at grade, but you could have split it up. You could have made sort of separate parallel things that sort of went apart and came back together, so you'd be dealing with half the volume of traffic and trying to accommodate it in an urban grid sort of a situation as part of a larger redevelopment plan. That'd be one of the sort of strategies. But when you go forward in life, you're going to have a property developer that's going to be beside you that is going to say, no, we will not bury the road. We'll actually tear down the shopping center because the shopping center, it doesn't have any value anymore, having been sort of already rebuilt 3 times since the 1940s when it was first created. And you'd be better off to just start off without it, I think.
Yes.
Qiansen, we're going to bring this to a wrap, but I want to just say this has really been a great discussion, and one of the things that we're not able to benefit from because of the limited real estate of the presentation venue is how incredibly rich your process has been through the semester, and how many of these suggestions have actually been considered and rejected systematically. This is just a fragment of the alternatives. The idea of rejection here was nothing about truth or lack thereof. It had to do with managing scope and getting it done. So this is one of the things that I've really always enjoyed about Qiansen is that, first he works tirelessly. All right, now this is not against anyone else in the Thesis studio, but I could come here almost any hour and he's working away at his desk. But not just, spinning his wheels, he's producing an incredible volume of work and deliberating and discussing and worrying and going back and forth. He chose a path here, not so much because it was, in fact, that Syrian vision that would change how it is we think about remaking these places, but something that, for him, said he could justify that expense of reducing it, and damn it, there's reluctance for public-private conversations, deep conversations, to talk about the trade-offs of paying forward and investing in a significant public change, so that the platform on which alternative futures could be built was really rich and dynamic. He doesn't know, he's done numbers of studying maximum housing, maximum office, various mixtures. The idea here was to set a table that worked on supporting interconnection and fabric that would work to allow this to continue to go through an evolution and change. And actually, we had to keep it from migrating out to the watershed and the housing. We just said, no, let's keep it to a group of blocks. Let's try to find ways in which you could actually get that ventilation. And oh, by the way, there's no sloped parking here on purpose. These are connected by internal ramps so that the alternative uses of this lower deck when cars retreat actually can be adaptively reused more easily. You didn't touch on that, but I know you touch on it in the text of your thesis. But there were some very deliberate things here where he stayed away from some ideas and held to others. I just want to say it's really been enjoyable for the past 2 years. I've had you at different studios and experiences. You're gonna make it a long way, and I hope you bring the lessons with you as you find your way in this profession. So
thank you very much.